A warm welcome to the program. I'm Layo Olarinde. Here's what's coming up on the program this week. Israel and Hamas resumes fighting after 7 days of truce that saw the exchange of Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners and inflow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Plus, a conversation with Olatunji Lanre-Barua, a human rights advocate and co-coordinator, Adopt a Camp. Diplomatic Channel begins right now with a quick check on other discussions in diplomatic circles.
As Ukraine approaches its second winter under Russian bombardment, NATO is warning that Russia has amassed a large missile stockpile ahead of the cold season.
Russia has amassed a large missile stockpile ahead of winter. And we see new attempts to strike Ukraine's power grid and energy infrastructure, trying to leave Ukraine in the dark and cold.
Meanwhile, Mr. Stoltenberg also told reporters that Ukraine was closer to NATO than ever before, adding that allies will continue to support the country on its way to membership.
Allies agree that Ukraine will become a member of NATO. We have now provided recommendations on Ukraine's priority reforms, including the fight against corruption, strengthening the rule of law, and supporting human rights and minority rights. Ukraine is closer to NATO than ever before. We will continue to support them on the path to membership. We will continue to support Ukraine's fight for freedom.
Kyiv has been concerned that the Israel-Hamas war could divert international attention away from its efforts to defeat Russia, which invaded Ukraine in February 2022. However, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says there is no sense of fatigue amongst NATO allies when it comes to helping Ukraine.
I heard no sense of fatigue or falling back. On the contrary, a determination to continue to press forward. And there's a good reason for that. I think every ally recognizes that this is a matter not only of doing the right thing, it's a matter of self-interest, including for the United States.
The U.S. says it has also been working with Ukraine to prepare for Russia's expected winter attack, including helping to provide equipment and supplies to keep people from losing heat and electricity.
We've been providing Ukraine with backup equipment and supplies, including high-voltage auto transformers, industrial-sized gas generators, and mobile off-grid equipment to add resiliency and prevent people from losing heat and electricity if Russia's strikes get through and are successful.
Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis accused his British counterpart Rishi Sunak of cancelling a scheduled meeting in London in a row over the status of the Parthenon sculptures. Athens has repeatedly asked the British Museum to permanently return the 2,500-year-old sculptures that British diplomat Lord Elgin removed from the Parthenon temple in the early 19th century when he was ambassador to the Ottoman Empire. The meeting was to take place in November during a trip by Mitsotakis to London, where the issue of the return of the Parthenon marbles to Greece, currently housed in the British Museum, was expected to be on the agenda. However, the Greek Prime Minister said the cancellation of the meeting will not affect Greek-British relations. On his part, British Prime Minister says assurances were broken by his Greek counterpart over the topic of the Parthenon marbles, which led to the cancellation of their meeting. In Parliament, Prime Minister Sunak says Britain and Greece say that the dispute jeopardized the opportunity to discuss global issues including the wars in Gaza and Ukraine and the climate crisis.
When people make commitments, they should keep them.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un received photos of the White House and Pentagon taken by its recently launched spy satellite. Well, this came a day after tense exchanges between Washington and Pyongyang during a UN Security Council meeting over the launch.
평양 시간 11월 27일
North Korean state media reported that its leader Kim Jong-un received photos of what it called major target regions in the U.S. taken by its recently launched spy satellite. KCNA said the batch includes photos of the White House, Pentagon and U.S. aircraft carriers.
영국 항공모함이 포착됐습니다.
However, Seoul officials say the North's claims could not be confirmed as it has not released the photos. The ambassador to the UN says the North's behavior is no longer a regional issue, but a global concern.
My delegation would like to highlight that DPRK's provocative behavior is no longer a regional issue. It is an issue of global concern, directly affecting all parts of the world. Left unchecked, the DPRK's proliferation of weapons and military technology, whether conventional or even nuclear, will further aggravate insecurity around the globe.
Contention over the satellite spilled over into a snap meeting of the UN Security Council a day earlier, which was called to convene after North Korea's launch following dozens of ballistic missile tests over the past 20 months. It resulted in a rare, direct public exchange between the US and North Korea. Here's US Ambassador Linda Thompson-Greenfield.
The DPRK has made its motivations clear. The DPRK is unabashedly trying to advance its nuclear weapons delivery systems by testing ballistic missile technology in clear violation of this Council's resolutions. This reckless, unlawful behavior threatens all of the DPRK's neighbors and all member states.
In unplanned remarks at the end of the meeting, Thomas Greenfield rejected Pyongyang's claims that its launch were defensive actions in response to military provocation by the US and its allies, but extended an offer for dialogue without preconditions.
The DPRK claims it's acting in self-defense, but the self-defense really does not stand here, as the U.S. and ROK military exercises, as you know, are routine and they're defensive in nature. And we intentionally reduce risk and pursue transparency by announcing the exercises in advance, including the dates and the activities, unlike the DPRK. And unlike the DPRK's launches using ballistic missile technology, these actions are not prohibited by UN Security Council resolutions. So we reject strongly the disingenuous DPRK claim that its missile launches are merely defensive in nature in response to our bilateral and trilateral military exercises.
In response, North Korea's ambassador Kim Song defended what he called his country's legitimate right to develop its weapon systems at par with the U.S.
One belligerent party, the United States, is threatening us with a nuclear weapon. It is a legitimate right for the DPRK as another belligerent party to develop, test, manufacture, and possess weapon system equivalent to those that the United States have already possessed and or developing right now.
Ambassador Kim Song further adds that the DPRK satellite launch is to get a clear picture of the military moves of the United States.
The DPRK launch of the reconnaissance satellite is to get a clear picture of the dire military moves of the United States and its followers, so that we could be fully prepared for them, with their aggressive nature becoming all the clearer as the days go by. It is legitimate and righteous exercise of the right to self-defense, which fully belongs to the legal sphere of our self-defense.
The United Nations says North Korea's rocket launches are a serious risk to civil aviation and maritime traffic.
The DPRK's launches represent a serious risk to international civil aviation and maritime traffic. While the DPRK issued the pre-launch notification to the Japanese Coast Guard, it did not issue airspace or maritime safety notifications to the International Maritime Organizations, the International Civil Aviation Organization, or the International Telecommunications Union. Mr. President, while sovereign states have the right to benefit from peaceful space activities, Security Council resolutions expressly prohibit the DPRK from conducting any launches using ballistic missile technology. On 21st of November, the Secretary General strongly condemned the launch of yet another military satellite using ballistic missile technology. It should be recalled that developing a military reconnaissance satellite was part of the plan, along with various other weapons systems, including so-called tactical nuclear weapons. As such, the DPRK has consistently demonstrated its strong intention to continue pursuing its nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs in violation of relevant Security Council resolutions. We emphasize once again our call on the DPRK to refrain from such actions.
North Korea has been under UN sanctions for its ballistic missile and nuclear programs for nearly 2 decades. But for the past several years, the UN Security Council has been divided over how to deal with Pyongyang, with veto powers Russia and China arguing against further sanctions. Washington says such protection from Moscow and Beijing only emboldens North Korea to continue to flout UN resolutions.
The Israeli Defense Forces have resumed the war despite continuing efforts by mediators in the Qatari capital of Doha to keep the ceasefire going. Well, the IDF says operations against Hamas have resumed to strike them in their strongholds.
Columns of smoke from an explosion rise in Gaza, as seen from southern Israel, as intense fighting resumes after a temporary 7-day pause in fighting between Israel and Hamas expired. Renewed fighting continued after talks to extend the pause collapsed, and mediators said Israeli bombardments were complicating attempts to again pause hostilities.
خرقت حماس أمس عمدا.
The Israeli government blames Hamas leader in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, for a breakdown in negotiations. The warring sides blame each other for the collapse of the 7-day pause, during which Hamas had released hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails.
لهذا القرار وهو يحيى سنوار.
Israel says it will seek a security envelope with special zones and arrangements that will prevent Hamas from being positioned on its border after the war in Gaza is over. This comes amidst reports that Israel has informed several Arab states that it wants to carve out a buffer zone on the Palestinian side of Gaza's border to prevent future attacks as part of proposals for the coastal enclave after the war ends.
So we have spoken that in the framework of the post-conflict relationships, Israel will have to have a security envelope. We can never again allow terrorists to cross the border and butcher our people the way they did on October 7th. And we can't take our eye off the ball. And so in a post-conflict reality, a post-Hamas reality, Israel will maintain for the foreseeable future overall security control. That will be a necessary prerequisite of any post-Hamas reality.
The U.S. has also sketched out its vision for post-conflict Gaza. At a news conference in the sidelines of the COP28 summit, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris said once the war ends, efforts to rebuild should be pursued with a view toward the goal of a two-state solution in which Israel and the Palestinians live in peace.
So we all want this conflict to end as soon as possible and to ensure Israel's security and ensure security for the Palestinian people. We must accelerate efforts to build an enduring peace, and that begins with planning for what happens the day after the fighting ends. Further, we have been clear, the Palestinians have a right to dignity and self-determination, and Israelis and Palestinians must enjoy equal measures of prosperity and freedom. They also all deserve a sense of safety and security, and a two-state solution then remains the best path, we believe, toward a durable peace.
As for the situation of exchange of people, Hamas made it clear that no more prisoners will be exchanged with Israel until there is a ceasefire in Gaza. Deputy Hamas Chief Saleh al-Aruri says the hostages still being held captive by Hamas are Israeli soldiers and civilian men who had previously served in the Israeli army, and they would not be freed unless there's a permanent ceasefire. Meanwhile, Israel says Hamas are still holding captive 17 women and children. And as the world hopes for a permanent ceasefire, fighting continues between Israel and Hamas.
Joining us now is Olatunji Lanre Barua, a human rights advocate and the co-coordinator at Adopt a Camp. Thank you for your time, Mr. Lanre.
Thank you for having me.
Let's begin with your thoughts on the humanitarian situation we're seeing that's playing out in Gaza. What do you make of this catastrophe?
It's an epic catastrophe, actually. It's disheartening that in 2023 we have to deal with this nature of crisis, this nature of humanitarian catastrophe, actually. And imagine over the last 6 weeks to 2 months, in under 2 months, we have lost about 14,000 people and about 1.8 million people displaced within just the Gaza Strip. That's, it's a huge crisis, a conflict of untold magnitude. When you look at that, you look at electricity and energy blackouts in the whole of Gaza, the blockage of humanitarian intervention, the total blackout of supplies to hospitals. And, you look at that and the severe food shortages that are, affecting Palestinians in the entire Gaza Strip. It is disheartening. It is a grave hardship coming upon those people.
Now, we've had 7 days of fragile truce that has seen the exchanges of Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners. But sadly, fighting has now resumed. Israel has begun bombing Gaza. How can those under siege, is there any way for them to be able to save themselves?
It's unfortunate that the truce had to come to an end. My expectation in the beginning, it was an initial 72 hours, 3-day truce. It was extended every other day, and then we ended up with the 7-day truce. If you look at the incident that happened in Tel Aviv, the attack by some suspected elements of Hamas, killing about 3 to 4 Israeli citizens, that incident may have contributed to the total breakdown, because most people were still, holding their breath, believing that we might have an extension. There was a promise of a potential 10-day truce, that we might be able to extend and elongate this to like 10 days. But unfortunately, it has come to an end and the bombardment has started. Now, the issue is bombardment seems to be now focused on southern Gaza. Southern Gaza had been the place where people were told to move to from northern Gaza at the beginning of the crisis. And that's the point, that lead you to Rafah crossing into Egypt. So the crisis now is where in the entire Gaza Strip is now a safe zone for Palestinians. I don't see anywhere. The only advice would be that people should shelter in place. People should seek out ordinarily, the advice we will prefer to people is that seek out internally displaced persons camp or go to medical facilities just, to mill around those areas. But like what we have seen in the northern Gaza Strip, there's been bombardment. The hospitals have not been, excluded from the area bombardment by the Israeli soldiers and the military. They bombarded hospitals, they bombarded schools, they bombarded IDP camps, on the allegation that Hamas elements were using bunkers around those areas to funnel weapons and to launch attack against Israel. So it's a very dicey situation. It's a difficult one. It's between the rock and a hard place, honestly. And we'll wait to see. But the only advice is just that we have to hope for a continuation of the mediation that is ongoing, that is spearheaded by the Qatari government, the Egyptians, and the United States. And that's the only hope. Continuation in the mediation so that this can transit into a permanent ceasefire.
Indeed, Qatar is, continuing the conversation. The U.S. also, these were the mediators for the truce that we saw that held on for 7 days. But, speaking about the hostages and prisoners that have been released, we've seen scenes of jubilations and celebrations as, families reunite with their loved ones. Now, for these people, they've been under a devastating situation, one can say. How can they be reintegrated back into the society after their ordeal of being in detention under Israel and under Hamas?
Yeah, it cuts across both sides. Like there were Israelis that were taken by Hamas elements and, as hostages. And there were also, thousands of Palestinians who have been in Israeli prisons. And, people in detention, wartime detention is actually very traumatic. You can't just wash it away. You can't clean it away. You can't just wake up, dust it off. Those trauma will live with those people. But, now we should be talking about how to rehabilitate those people psychologically, socially, and all that. I saw, clips of hostages that were released, and, the conflicting, how would I put that? In contradiction, you find that most of the Israeli hostages that were held by, Hamas, were reporting that they were well treated, after they were moved into captivity. They were not tortured, they were not beaten, they were fed, and they were treated, fairly and properly. But you see the clips from the Palestinians who were released, the ones that were released, into West Bank and all of them were lamenting the conditions of their detention. They were lamenting about food, they were lamenting about BTI gas in detention, they were lamenting about not being allowed to change their clothes for like up to 14 days to 2 weeks plus and all that. So you find that it's really those periods, and a lot of them have been in blackout. Some people have not even been able to come out to see what the day looks like. They don't even know when it's sunny, when it's bright, when it's dark, and all that. So the trauma will live with them. It's difficult rehabilitating people who have been held under inhuman conditions. And one of the things we hope for is that the United Nations humanitarian agencies will move in and compel Israel to respect international humanitarian laws.
Well, speaking about hope, Egypt has been strategic in delivering much-needed humanitarian assistance and aid to Gaza amidst the truce. That's talking about food, medicine, water. What more should countries do to actually help?
Egypt has been strategic. You have to look at Egypt as a major geographic entry and exit point to the Gaza Strip. It borders Gaza, along with Israel. And you have to look at it also as a as a logistics transit point for movement into Gaza. And so Egypt, as it is right now, is in economic turmoil. You have to look at the strategy of Egyptian involvement in this crisis. It is to ensure that they do not allow Palestinian refugees into their home borders. One that has a lot of complication for them, in spite of their economic challenges at the moment. They also do not want Palestinian refugees to come into the Sinai. The Sinai is controlled by the Egyptian government, but part of this fear is that if you allow Palestinians to move in there, the militant elements usually embed themselves in among the regular people. By the time they come in there, they might decide to start using those territories as a launch pad for attacks against Israel, and that strategically and unfortunately drags Egypt into a crisis directly heads-on against Israel. Egypt does not want that, and Egypt has decided to play the part of a mediating party in this crisis, and which it has done really well. Most of the trucks, most of the supplies, humanitarian supplies that goes into Gaza has been, practically all of them came through the Rafah crossing via Egypt. You find that injured Palestinians are moved, during the humanitarian corridor, were moved into hospitals in Egypt. You find that also that Israeli hostages that were released by Hamas were released at the Rafah crossing to go into Egypt for onward transportation into Israel. So Egypt is strategic in a lot of ways. Most hostages, beside the hostages, you also look at there's a whole lot happening. All the trucks we've had about 220 trucks moving in every day, which will have come to about 2,000 trucks going into the Gaza Strip over the last 7 days. That has gone in through Egypt. So, and also, look at the negotiation going on midway by Qatari government and the Egyptian government. So Egypt is strategically very key to the ending of this crisis, key to the Israelis, key to the Palestinians, and also key, a gateway to the West to find a solution to this. And I hope this solution come as fast as possible.
Indeed, the hope is that, there's an end to this crisis and war in Israel. We would like to thank you, Mr. Olatunji Lanre Barua, human rights advocate and the coordinator of Adopt a Camp. Thank you for your time on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you for having me all the time.
This is where we end the program this week. Thank you for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde. Do join me again next time.